You've seen messages like this before, and almost instinctively, you move past them. Sometimes you don't even read the full line. Your finger scrolls, your attention shifts, and within seconds it's gone. This habit didn't form because you're careless or uninterested. It formed because skipping has become a way to stay comfortable. Messages that ask you to pause, reflect, or look inward interrupt the rhythm you've trained yourself to live by. Modern life rewards speed. The faster you move, the less you have to feel. Scrolling, multitasking, and constant input keep the mind occupied and protected from silence. Silence is where questions arise. Questions about direction, purpose, choices, and feelings that don't fit neatly into your daily routine. Messages like this threaten that shield. They don't demand action, but they invite awareness. And awareness can feel heavier than distraction. You skip because slowing down creates a sense of vulnerability. When you pause, even briefly, you give space for thoughts you've been avoiding to surface. You might feel uncertainty, restlessness, or an uncomfortable sense that something needs attention. Skipping allows you to postpone that moment, not forever, just for now. And for now has a way of repeating. There's also familiarity in skipping. You've done it many times without consequence. Life continues, nothing breaks. Responsibilities remain manageable. This creates the illusion that skipping costs nothing, but the cost isn't immediate or dramatic. It's subtle. Each skipped moment reinforces the habit of avoidance. Over time, this habit shapes how you relate to yourself. You become skilled at staying busy while remaining slightly disconnected. Another reason you skip is because messages like this feel personal. Even though they're not directly addressing your situation, they resonate enough to feel intrusive. It's easier to engage with content that stays surface level, that entertains or distracts without asking anything of you. This kind of message feels like it's looking back at you, and that can be uncomfortable. You might also tell yourself that these messages are exaggerated, repetitive, or manipulative. That may be true in some cases, but even recognizing that doesn't fully explain why you still feel the urge to avoid them. The reaction is deeper than logic. It's about timing and readiness. When you're not ready to reflect, even neutral prompts can feel demanding. Skipping is also a way to maintain control. When you don't engage, you don't have to respond internally. You don't have to question your choices or your pace. You remain in motion, which feels safer than stillness. Stillness removes excuses. It reveals what's already there. There's nothing wrong with skipping occasionally. The issue arises when skipping becomes automatic. When you skip not because you've chosen to, but because you're avoiding the pause itself. At that point, the habit is no longer about content. It's about maintaining distance from your own awareness. Messages like this tend to appear during periods when something inside you is already shifting. You may not consciously recognize it, but there's often a background sense of restlessness, fatigue, or quiet dissatisfaction. Not enough to cause a breakdown, but enough to create discomfort when silence appears. Skipping helps you outrun that discomfort. You always skip because engaging would mean acknowledging that you're at a moment where reflection matters. That doesn't mean something is wrong. It means something is changing. Change doesn't always arrive as chaos. Sometimes it arrives as a gentle nudge that you're tempted to ignore. The mind is very good at justifying avoidance. It says you're too busy, too tired, or not in the mood. It convinces you that now isn't the right time, and often that feels true. But the right time rarely announces itself loudly. It arrives quietly, disguised as moments you almost skip. You skip because pausing feels unproductive, because reflection does offer immediate results, because you can measure it the way you measure tasks completed or goals achieved. But reflection shapes direction in ways action alone cannot. This message does accuse you of doing something wrong. It simply mirrors a pattern you may not have noticed. The pattern of moving past moments that ask for presence. You're not weak for skipping. You're a human. You adapted to a fast-moving world by learning how not to stop. But every so often, something interrupts that pattern. Something lingers just long enough to make you wonder why you felt the urge to skip in the first place. That moment isn't a demand. It's an invitation. And noticing the invitation, even without acting on it yet, is already a shift. Urgency is often misunderstood because it's usually paired with fear. When people hear that time is limited, they assume something bad is about to happen. Their body tightens, their mind races, and their instinct is either to panic or to shut down. But there is another kind of urgency that does come from danger. It comes from awareness. It comes from recognizing that a moment matters even if nothing dramatic is unfolding. This kind of urgency does shout. It does threaten. It doesn't try to control your behavior. Instead, it quietly draws your attention to the present. It says this matters more than you think. Not because disaster is near, but because clarity is available right now. And clarity, when ignored, does disappear. It simply becomes harder to access later. Fear-based urgency weakens you. It pushes you into reaction mode. You rush, make impulsive choices, or avoid the situation altogether. Awareness-based urgency does the opposite. It steadies you. It slows you just enough to notice what is happening beneath the surface. It doesn't ask for speed. It asks for presence. When a message says there is limited time, it doesn't always refer to an external deadline. Often, it points to an internal window, a period when you are receptive, when insight can land, when something you've been sensing quietly is ready to be acknowledged. These windows don't stay open forever, not because life is cruel, but because attention moves on. Distraction returns. Habits reclaim their place. This is why urgency without fear feels different in the body. Instead of anxiety, there's a subtle pull, a sense of importance without panic. You may feel slightly uncomfortable, not because you're threatened, but because something meaningful is being highlighted. That discomfort is not danger, it's significance. People often ignore this type of urgency because it doesn't feel dramatic enough to justify stopping. There's no crisis forcing action. Everything seems fine on the surface. But awareness-based urgency isn't about fixing something that's broken. It's about noticing something that's forming. A shift in values, a growing misalignment, a need for rest, honesty, or redirection. Fear tells you that if you don't act now, you'll lose everything. Awareness tells you that if you don't notice now, you'll continue unconsciously. One creates pressure. The other creates responsibility. Responsibility is heavier than fear because it gives you choice. You are not being pushed. You are being invited. This kind of urgency respects your freedom. It doesn't chase you down or punish you for ignoring it. You can skip it, and life will continue. That's what makes it easy to dismiss. But just because you can ignore it doesn't mean it lacks importance. Some of the most meaningful moments in life are optional. They don't force themselves on you. They wait for readiness. Urgency without fear often shows up when you've been postponing something internally, not deliberately but gradually. A feeling you keep pushing aside, a truth you acknowledge briefly and then distract yourself from. Over time, postponement becomes a pattern. The urgency is simply the pattern becoming visible. This is also why the message tells you not to open it quickly. Speed would turn urgency back into fear or impulse. Slowing down transforms urgency into clarity. When you rush, you react. When you pause, you understand. Understanding is what makes urgency useful rather than overwhelming. There is a calm authority in this kind of urgency. It doesn't beg for your attention. It doesn't exaggerate consequences. It simply states that now is a meaningful moment, not better than any other moment, just more aligned with awareness. You can meet it or move past it. Either way, the responsibility is yours. Many people wait for fear to motivate change. They wait for pain, loss, or crisis to force reflection. Awareness-based urgency offers a gentler path. It says you don't have to suffer to wake up. You can choose to notice before things become heavy. This urgency isn't asking you to make drastic decisions. It's asking you to notice what you've been avoiding, what you've been postponing, or what you already know but haven't acted on yet. It's asking for honesty, not urgency-driven action. When you understand urgency without fear, something shifts. You stop resisting moments like this. You no longer see them as pressure or manipulation. You recognize them as invitations to be present. And presence, when chosen freely, becomes one of the most powerful forms of protection and guidance you can have. Delaying something important rarely feels dangerous in the moment. It feels reasonable. You tell yourself you'll get to it later. when you have more time, more energy, or more clarity. And because nothing immediately goes wrong, delay starts to feel harmless. Life continues to function. Responsibilities are met. Days move forward. This is why constant delay is so easy to live with and so difficult to notice. The real cost of delay is not sudden loss or obvious failure. It's gradual disconnection. Each time you postpone something that asks for reflection or honesty, you reinforce the habit of avoidance. Over time, this habit becomes automatic. You don't consciously decide to delay anymore. You just move past moments that require attention. What's lost isn't time, but presence. Delay often disguises itself as patience or practicality. You convince yourself that waiting is the mature choice, that now isn't the right moment. Sometimes that's true, but constant delay has a different feeling. It's accompanied by a quiet tension, a sense that something is unfinished or unresolved. You feel it in the background, even when you're busy. That tension is the mind keeping track of what's been postponed. When you delay reflection, decisions don't disappear. They linger. They occupy mental space without resolution. This creates mental noise, low-level stress that never fully turns off. You may not notice it directly, but it shows up as fatigue, irritability, or difficulty focusing. You feel busy yet unfulfilled, active yet slightly disconnected. One of the most significant costs of delay is how it shapes identity. When you repeatedly avoid moments that ask for honesty, you start seeing yourself as someone who puts things off or never gets around to it. This perception quietly weakens self-trust. You begin to doubt your ability to respond when something truly matters. Even small delays add up, not in missed opportunities, but in confidence. Delay also affects emotional processing. Feelings that aren't acknowledged don't resolve themselves. They stay stored. Over time, they can surface in unexpected ways of reactions, numbness, or sudden emotional exhaustion. You may find yourself responding strongly to minor situations without knowing why. Often, it's because unaddressed emotions have been waiting too long. Another cost of constant delay is misalignment. When you postpone checking in with yourself, your actions can drift away from your values. You continue doing what's familiar rather than what's meaningful. This doesn't happen all at once. It happens slowly through small compromises that feel insignificant on their own. Eventually, you look back and wonder how you ended up feeling so far from what matters to you. Delay also impacts clarity. The longer you postpone something, the heavier it feels. What might have required a small adjustment earlier now feels overwhelming. This creates a cycle. The task feels bigger because you delayed it, and you delay it because it feels big. Over time, this cycle reinforces avoidance and drains energy. Constant delay teaches the mind that discomfort should always be postponed. This reduces your tolerance for stillness and reflection. You become more reliant on distraction to manage internal unease. Silence feels uncomfortable not because something is wrong, but because it reminds you of what has been waiting. It is important to understand that delay does to make you irresponsible or weak. It often comes from self-protection. At some point, delaying may have helped you cope. It allowed you to function during periods of stress or uncertainty. But what once protected you can later limit you. Growth requires different responses than survival. The cost of delay is also cumulative. One postponed moment rarely causes harm, but patterns form through repetition. When weeks turn into months and months into years, the weight of what's been delayed becomes noticeable. You may feel stuck without knowing exactly why. The reason is often not lack of action, but lack of acknowledgement. What makes delay particularly costly is that it is optional. No one forces you to postpone. You choose it, often unconsciously. This means you also have the power to choose differently. Awareness breaks the pattern. The moment you recognize delay as a habit rather than a necessity, something shifts. Addressing delay does require immediate solutions or dramatic changes. It begins with noticing. Noticing when you say, later. Noticing what you feel just before you postpone. Noticing the relief that comes from avoidance and the lingering tension that follows, that awareness alone reduces the cost. Delay steals little by little, not loudly but consistently. It takes clarity, presence, and self-trust in small amounts over time. Reclaiming those doesn't happen through pressure, but through honesty. When you stop postponing moments that ask for attention, you don't suddenly fix everything. You simply stop adding to the weight. And that is often where real forward movement begins. Silence often feels uncomfortable because it removes the distractions that keep deeper thoughts at a distance. In silence, there is nothing to react to, nothing to consume, nothing to hide behind. This is why many people instinctively fill every quiet moment with noise, music, videos, conversations, tasks. Noise gives the mind something to hold on to. Silence gives the mind space, and space allows awareness to surface. Guidance rarely arrives when the mind is crowded. When attention is constantly pulled outward, there is no room for clarity to form. Silence is not empty, it is receptive. It creates the conditions where insight can appear naturally, without force. This is why meaningful realizations often happen in moments of pause, during a quiet walk, late at night, or in the brief stillness before sleep. Nothing new is added in these moments. Something already present simply becomes visible. Many people avoid silence because they believe it will bring discomfort, and sometimes it does at first. Silence can surface unresolved thoughts, emotions, or questions that have been pushed aside. But this discomfort is not a sign that silence is harmful. It is a sign that something has been waiting for attention. Noise postpones that meeting. Silence allows it. Guidance does not arrive as commands or instruction. It arrives as understanding, a sudden sense of clarity about a decision, a realization about what no longer fits, a calm knowing that does need explanation. These insights don't come from external input. They come from within, but they require quiet to be heard. When life feels confusing, the instinct is often to seek more information, more advice, more opinions. While external perspectives can help, they can also add to the noise. Too many voices make it harder to recognize your own. Silence reduces that interference. It doesn't give you answers instantly, but it allows the right questions to rise. Silence is also where patterns become noticeable. When you're constantly busy, everything feels urgent and equally important. In silence, priorities naturally separate themselves. Some thoughts fade quickly, revealing they were never important. Others return again and again, calmly and persistently. These recurring thoughts are often signals of what needs attention. People sometimes assume that guidance should be dramatic or emotional. In reality, it is often subtle and steady. It doesn't push. It doesn't rush. It feels grounded. Silence allows you to distinguish between impulse and insight. Impulse is loud and urgent. Insight is quiet and consistent. Avoiding silence keeps you reactive. You respond to whatever is loudest, newest, or most demanding. Embracing silence shifts you into a more intentional state. You stop reacting automatically. You start choosing deliberately. This shift doesn't happen through effort. It happens through allowing space. Silence also changes your relationship with time. When you are always busy, time feels scarce and pressured. In silence, time feels more spacious. You realize that not every moment needs to be filled to be valuable. This perspective reduces anxiety and increases clarity. Decisions made from calm awareness tend to be more aligned than those made under pressure. Another reason silence feels challenging is because it removes validation. When you're not engaging with others or consuming content, there is no immediate feedback. You are left with your own experience. This can feel unfamiliar if you've relied heavily on external input. But this is also where self-trust grows. Listening to yourself without immediate confirmation strengthens confidence. Silence doesn't mean isolation. It means intentional pause. Even a few moments of stillness can reset your awareness. You don't need hours of quiet. You need consistency. Small pauses throughout the day create space for guidance to surface gradually. In silence, you may realize that some concerns are smaller than they seemed. Others may feel more important. This reordering is natural. Silence strips away urgency that doesn't matter and highlights what does. That is guidance in its simplest form. Many people fear that if they stop, they will fall behind. In reality, constant motion often leads to misdirection. Silence acts as a course correction. It doesn't slow you down permanently. It ensures you're moving in a direction that makes sense. Guidance has always been available. It doesn't arrive from outside when you finally do something right. It emerges when conditions allow it to be noticed. Silence creates those conditions, not by forcing insight, but by removing what blocks it. When you allow silence without immediately trying to escape it, you may notice a subtle sense of steadiness. Thoughts settle. Emotions soften. Perspective widens. This is not emptiness. This is clarity forming. And from that clarity, guidance naturally follows, quietly and reliably, without needing to announce itself. Speed feels productive, but very often it is a way to avoid feeling. Moving quickly through life creates the illusion of control while quietly preventing deeper awareness. When everything is rushed, there is no time to notice discomfort, doubt, or unresolved questions. Speed keeps the surface smooth by never allowing you to sink below it. Many people associate slowing down with weakness or inefficiency. From an early age, speed is praised. Fast responses, fast results, fast growth. The faster you move, the more capable you seem, but speed also removes space. And without space, reflection cannot occur. When there is no pause between actions, choices are made automatically rather than consciously. Speed is attractive because it numbs. When you are busy, multitasking, jumping from one thing to another, your nervous system stays stimulated. This stimulation can mask anxiety, uncertainty, or dissatisfaction. You feel occupied, even important. But underneath that motion, the same unanswered questions remain, waiting. Rushing becomes a habit. At first, it feels necessary. Later, it feels normal. Eventually, it feels uncomfortable to slow down. Silence and stillness begin to feel unfamiliar, even threatening. This is not because slowing down is harmful, but because it removes the distraction speed provides. When speed disappears, awareness returns. Speed simplifies life in a deceptive way. It turns complex emotions into background noise. It postpones decisions that require honesty. It allows you to say, I don't have time to think about that right now. Over time, those deferred thoughts accumulate. They don't disappear. They wait. When people say they are overwhelmed, it is often not because they are doing too much, but because they are doing everything too fast. Speed compresses experience. There is no room to process what is happening as it happens. This creates a constant sense of pressure, even during success. Speed also weakens presence. When you rush through conversations, tasks, and moments, you are physically there but mentally ahead. This disconnect can create a quiet emptiness. You are always arriving at the next thing without fully being in the current one. Life becomes a sequence of transitions rather than experiences. Slowing down does not mean stopping progress. It means allowing awareness to catch up with action. When awareness is present, choices improve. You notice what drains you and what energizes you. You recognize patterns instead of repeating them unconsciously. Speed prevents this recognition by keeping everything blurred. One of the reasons speed feels safe is because it avoids commitment. When you rush, you don't fully commit to a feeling, a decision, or a direction. Everything stays temporary and adjustable. Slowing down requires presence, and presence requires responsibility. It asks you to acknowledge what you actually want and what you are avoiding. Speed can also be a response to fear. Fear of missing out, fear of falling behind, fear of being left with your own thoughts. By moving quickly, you stay ahead of these fears, at least temporarily. But fear that is outrun is not resolved. It simply waits for exhaustion. When exhaustion arrives, speed no longer works. Burnout is often the moment when speed fails as a coping strategy. The body demands rest, the mind resists. This tension reveals how dependent speed has become. What once felt like momentum now feels like pressure. Slowing down reveals truth gradually, not all at once. Small realizations surface. Subtle discomforts become noticeable. This can feel inconvenient, but it is also clarifying. You begin to understand why certain things feel heavy or misaligned. Speed hides these signals. Stillness highlights them. Speed also affects decision-making. Fast decisions are often reactive, shaped by urgency rather than intention. Slow decisions allow values to be considered. They allow intuition to contribute. They reduce regret. This doesn't mean hesitation. It means alignment. Choosing to slow down is not about rejecting ambition. It is about redefining strength. Strength is not constant motion. Strength is the ability to pause without panic, to be still without needing distraction, to sit with uncertainty without immediately escaping it. Even brief moments of slowing down can change perception. A pause before responding, a quiet minute without a screen, a deliberate breath before continuing. These moments interrupt automatic speed and reintroduce awareness. Over time, these interruptions build clarity. Speed promises relief but delivers delay. It delays understanding. It delays resolution. It delays alignment. Slowing down feels harder at first because it removes the anesthetic. But once awareness returns, decisions become cleaner, energy becomes steadier, and direction becomes clearer. You don't need to abandon movement to stop escaping. You only need to allow space within it. When speed no longer controls you, it becomes a tool instead of a shield. And in that balance, you stop running from yourself and start moving with intention. Many people believe that strength means handling everything alone. From a young age, some are taught that asking for help is weakness, that showing struggle is unacceptable, and independence is the ultimate sign of capability. Over time, these lessons solidify into habits. You carry burdens silently, process challenges privately, and assume that resilience is measured by endurance rather than understanding. On the surface, this looks like strength. Beneath it, however, lies exhaustion, isolation, and a quiet depletion of energy that is easy to ignore. Carrying everything alone does not make problems disappear. It only ensures that the weight is concentrated entirely on you. Emotional tension, unresolved feelings, and unexamined questions do not vanish simply because they are not shared. They linger in the background, subtly influencing thoughts, behaviors, and reactions. The result is a life that feels busy and full, yet strangely heavy and disconnected. One reason people cling to self-reliance is fear of misunderstanding. Reaching out can feel risky. It requires vulnerability, and vulnerability can feel unsafe if there's no guarantee of acceptance. Past experiences where support was withheld or minimized often reinforce the belief that self-sufficiency is safer than connection. Over time, this belief becomes internalized, and silence becomes the default response. Another reason is responsibility. You may feel that others already carry enough, and adding your burden would be unfair. This sense of over-responsibility, while stemming from empathy, often turns inward as neglect. You become a source of support for others while rarely allowing the same in return. Strength, in this context, becomes one-sided. Over time, it transforms from empowerment into quiet depletion. True strength is not about isolation. It is about discernment, knowing when to endure, when to act, and when to release, recognizing when challenges can be handled alone, and when sharing the load creates better outcomes. Allowing yourself to be seen or to accept support does not make you fragile, it makes you honest. Honesty fosters resilience because it prevents hidden pressures from accumulating unchecked. Many people fear that accepting support would diminish their autonomy. They worry that reliance on others equals weakness. In truth, strength grows when you recognize limits and allow collaboration, even internally. Seeking guidance or perspective from your own reflections or trusted confidence strengthens clarity and confidence. Silence does not always equal strength. Selective engagement does. Carrying everything alone also applies internally. Unprocessed emotions, repeated self-criticism, and constant mental overdrive are burdens of a solitary mind. These internal pressures can be just as exhausting as external obligation. Learning to notice them, accept them, and sometimes release them is a form of self-support as powerful as any external help. True resilience incorporates internal kindness, not just external endurance. Isolation as a habit is reinforced by routine. Constant movement and responsibility mask fatigue. Tasks are completed, obligations are met, but energy remains diminished. The mind convinces itself that coping alone is a moral or personal obligation, not a learned behavior that can be modified. Awareness of this pattern is the first step toward breaking it. The cost of carrying everything alone is cumulative. Each unshared worry, each unexpressed emotion, each postponed conversation adds weight. Over time, stress becomes chronic. Decisions feel heavier, challenges feel harder, and internal tension grows. What begins as an act of independence slowly turns into restriction, limiting not only energy but also perspective and creativity. Recognizing the habit of solitary endurance is transformative. It begins with small actions, acknowledging fatigue, admitting uncertainty, or quietly sharing a concern. These acts do not remove responsibility, they redistribute it in a healthy way. Strength is not diminished by collaboration or reflection, it is amplified. The capacity to respond to challenges increases when support is accepted, both internally and externally. True resilience also comes from distinguishing between control and responsibility. You cannot control how others respond, what challenges arise, or how circumstances unfold. What you can control is your response, your energy, and the clarity you cultivate. Sharing load or seeking insight does not cede control, it creates space for measured, intentional action. The belief that strength requires solitude often arises from survival. At one time, relying solely on yourself may have been necessary, it kept you moving, functional, and safe. But what was survival is not necessarily thriving. Thriving requires integration, connecting internal awareness with external resources, balancing self-reliance with receptivity. Letting go of the compulsion to carry everything alone is not a single act. It is a series of choices, pauses to reflect, moments to seek perspective, and decisions to accept support when offered. Each choice builds the foundation for sustainable strength. Over time, endurance evolves into resilience, isolation transforms into connection, and effort turns into empowered action. When you allow yourself to release the need to do it all alone, you reclaim energy, clarity, and presence. You discover that strength is not the absence of support, but the wise allocation of energy, awareness, and engagement. You are capable of handling life's challenges not through relentless self-reliance, but through intentional balance, conscious choice, and the courage to be human while still standing strong. Life is full of moments that feel ordinary, even insignificant, yet quietly carry the potential to change everything. These are the moments that arrive without fanfare, without obvious urgency, and without any external pressure. They slip into your awareness as small nudges, fleeting thoughts, or subtle feelings that you might otherwise ignore, and because they feel minor, they are often overlooked. The irony is that these moments, when noticed, can become turning points, shaping decisions, attitudes, and trajectories far more than dramatic events ever could. A turning point does not always announce itself with drama. It rarely arrives with a headline or a warning sign. Often, it presents itself in a whisper, a thought you can't quite ignore, a pattern you've begun to recognize, or a restless feeling that refuses to be silenced. At first, these signs are easy to dismiss. You tell yourself you'll revisit them later, or that it's not the right time. The mind prefers familiarity, and familiarity rarely feels urgent. That is why these small moments of insight are so easily skipped or overlooked. Subtle turning points are demanding in a quiet way. They require awareness, honesty, and engagement without offering immediate guidance on what to do next. They do not force action but invite it. They test your readiness to acknowledge what is rising within you and your willingness to pause before moving forward. This is why they are so often ignored. They demand responsibility without dramatics, and responsibility is heavier than fear, especially when no external pressure is present. When you bypass these subtle moments repeatedly, you are not avoiding life itself but postponing alignment. Life's rhythm continues, but you miss the chance to respond consciously. You continue to operate on autopilot, guided more by habit than intention. Small decisions made or avoided during these quiet intervals accumulate over time. They shape your habits, emotional responses, and sense of purpose in ways that may not be immediately visible, but are profoundly influential over the long term. The discomfort of subtle turning points is often internal rather than external. There is rarely a crisis to compel action. Instead, there is a quiet unease that comes from noticing a gap between where you are and where you sense you could be. This unease is not punishment. It is information. It signals that something in your life is asking for attention, perhaps a choice, a shift in behavior, or the courage to confront a truth you've been avoiding. Ignoring it may feel easier, but doing so reinforces habits of avoidance that subtly shape your direction over time. Subtle turning points are deeply personal. No one else needs to witness them for them to matter. Their significance exists entirely within your engagement with the moment. You may feel a growing clarity about what matters most to you, or a renewed sense of priorities that you had previously neglected. These realizations are often internalized quietly without external acknowledgement, but they are no less real for their subtlety. They are seeds of transformation that require your attention to grow. One reason these moments are so powerful is that they offer choice. Unlike crises, which often demand immediate reaction, subtle turning points allow reflection. They let you examine options, weigh outcomes, and align decisions with your values. They provide the rare opportunity to act from awareness rather than impulse. Choosing to engage with these moments, even imperfectly, is an act of courage because it requires vulnerability and honesty with oneself. The value of subtle turning points becomes clearer when you consider their cumulative effect. A single moment of awareness may seem small, but repeated engagement with these moments develops a pattern of intentionality. Over time, you begin to respond to life with greater presence, making choices that reflect conscious alignment rather than reactive habits. This pattern strengthens self-trust, increases clarity, and creates resilience in ways that dramatic interventions cannot. Recognizing a subtle turning point requires slowing down, listening closely, and observing patterns without judgment. It is less about immediate action and more about calibration, about understanding the trajectory of your thoughts, feelings, and habits. Pausing to reflect allows the mind to filter what is truly significant from what is merely noise. It creates a bridge between the automatic tendencies that dominate daily life and the intentional, aware engagement that builds a meaningful direction. Subtle turning points also challenge the illusion of control. You may feel that life is linear and predictable, but these quiet moments reveal the layers beneath. They show you where you have agency and where you have been unconsciously following momentum. Engaging with them requires humility and curiosity, not mastery. They remind you that influence is often quiet and incremental rather than loud and immediate. The true power of these moments lies in the awareness they cultivate. Noticing a subtle shift within yourself opens the door to conscious decision-making. It allows reflection on what is aligned with your values, what feels authentic, and what has been postponed for too long. Every time you engage with these small turning points, you reinforce the habit of presence, clarity, and intentionality. You stop moving through life passively and begin to navigate it with awareness. Ultimately, subtle turning points are invitations. They do not demand attention through urgency or crisis, but through quiet persistence. They ask you to stop and notice, to engage even with clarity, and to allow understanding to surface gradually. Over time, choosing to honor these moments transforms patterns of avoidance into patterns of alignment. The quiet decisions made in these moments ripple outward, influencing choices, priorities, and ultimately the direction of your life. By listening, reflecting, and responding consciously, you convert what might have been a fleeting, easily ignored moment into a turning point that guides your path with intention, clarity, and awareness. When you finally stop skipping, when you pause long enough to truly notice, something subtle but powerful begins to shift. The world doesn't announce it with fireworks or dramatic signs, yet you feel it in the way your attention becomes sharper, your thoughts clearer, and your emotions steadier. This shift is the result of acknowledging what you previously ignored, of allowing awareness to settle where habit once ruled. The act of choosing to engage, even for a brief moment, creates a ripple that touches every part of your experience, transforming how you perceive time, decision-making, and your own presence. When you stop avoiding, you give yourself permission to confront both clarity and discomfort. This is not always easy. For a long time, you may have hidden behind constant motion, distraction, or noise, believing that staying busy was the safest choice. You told yourself that delaying reflection was practical, that postponing decisions was harmless, that ignoring nudges of awareness was simply efficient. But the truth is that avoidance slowly accumulates. Thoughts, emotions, and intuitions that are skipped do not vanish, they lie in the background, influencing actions, perceptions, and energy without your conscious understanding. By finally paying attention, you start to release that hidden weight. The transformation begins internally. You notice a lightness, a quiet steadiness, as if a subtle tension that had been simmering beneath the surface is relieved. Decisions that previously felt overwhelming now appear manageable, not because the problems themselves have disappeared, but because you have returned to a state of awareness where clarity guides action rather than reaction. By stopping long enough to notice, you activate a form of internal guidance that was always present, yet inaccessible while you moved too fast or avoided reflection. Stopping also changes your perception of time. When moments are skipped, life feels fragmented, hurried, and unpredictable. But when you choose to engage, you experience a kind of expansion. Time is no longer just a sequence of tasks to complete. It becomes a canvas where awareness and intention can coexist. You see connections between experiences, notice patterns that previously went unseen, and recognize choices that align with your deeper priorities. This perception shift allows you to act more purposefully, reducing the friction and exhaustion that comes from reacting automatically. Another effect of choosing not to skip is increased self-trust. Each time you pause and honor a nudge of awareness, you reinforce the understanding that you are capable of noticing, reflecting, and responding consciously. Self-trust grows cumulatively. It is strengthened by repeated engagement with moments that previously would have been dismissed. This trust is subtle but foundational. It changes how you approach decisions, challenges, and interactions. You no longer rely solely on external guidance or immediate validation because you have discovered an internal source of direction that responds reliably when nurtured. The decision to stop skipping also improves emotional clarity. Emotions that were previously ignored or suppressed begin to be acknowledged without judgment. You can differentiate between what matters and what does not, between impulses and deeper insights. Recognizing emotions in this way does not always make them easier to manage initially, but it transforms them from hidden forces into conscious data. You can respond rather than react. You can integrate experiences rather than carry them unconsciously. This engagement also affects resilience. When you pay attention instead of avoiding, you prepare yourself for challenges before they escalate. Problems do not necessarily disappear, but your capacity to navigate them increases because you have aligned awareness with action. Obstacles that might have felt sudden or overwhelming before are now approached with clarity and calm. You respond rather than react, and this difference has lasting effects on energy, confidence, and decision-making. Choosing to stop skipping also fosters a deeper connection with your intuition. Intuition is often quiet, subtle, and easily drowned out by noise and distraction. By pausing and noticing, you create the conditions for intuition to be recognized and trusted. This is not mystical, it is practical. Intuition is simply the mind and body processing patterns and information that are not immediately obvious to conscious thought. Engagement allows these patterns to surface in ways that support better decisions and alignment with your true priorities. Finally, stopping teaches a profound lesson about timing and readiness. Awareness cannot be forced, it cannot be rushed. By choosing to pause and notice, you honor the natural rhythm of insight. Moments of guidance and clarity arrive when the conditions are right, and readiness is cultivated through repeated acts of attention. Each choice to engage strengthens your ability to recognize and respond to future moments, creating a positive feedback loop where awareness and action mutually reinforce one another. In essence, the transformation that occurs when you finally do not skip is a combination of clarity, self-trust, emotional integration, and heightened perception. Life does not suddenly become perfect, but your relationship with it changes fundamentally. You move from unconscious reaction to conscious participation, from fragmented attention to intentional presence, and from subtle avoidance to empowered engagement. Every choice to stop, notice, and honor a moment builds momentum, turning what might have been an overlooked or skipped opportunity into a stepping stone toward alignment, insight, and personal evolution. The simple act of engagement is the catalyst for a life lived with presence, clarity, and purposeful direction.